Welcome, everybody, to Dead Talk Live. I'm your host, Viz, and today we have veteran actor with us, Joseph Reitman, who is appearing in Netflix's latest series, First Kill. Now, I saw that look, Joseph. Veteran does not mean old, it means
I,
experienced.
I appreciate you saying that. I will say this: I went into a store today and I got my first senior discount in my life without asking for it. The guy just gave it to me, and that made me feel on top of it a little bit older than I actually am. So
I'm
there you
with you. I'm
go.
celebrating my 48th birthday here in a couple of weeks. So, man, I'll tell you. But like we said, Joseph is appearing, co starring in First Kill. It's on Netflix. It premiered last month, June 10th to be exact. He plays, it's a vampire show. For anybody who hasn't heard of it or seen it yet, it's a vampire show. Joseph plays Clayton Cook, a vampire killer, but sort of a rebellious vampire killer. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. Uh, First off, when the character Clayton Cook was described to you, how was he described to you?
The show is about like monster hunters and a family of vampires. So he's part of this group called the Guild, which is a group of monster hunters. And the original breakdown was basically Clayton Cook is a wisecracking elder statesman of the Guild who definitely doesn't take any crap. Is basically what it boiled down to. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it came my way, and that was basically all the description that I got.
So, when you went in for the audition, what kind of, what did they have you read? Did you have any more information by the time you got to the audition? How did that all play out?
Well, it's interesting. I'm friends with Felicia Henderson, who's the showrunner, because I appeared on The Punisher, which was a show she was
Yeah.
an executive producer on, and I was actually brought on board for the show as an acting coach to work with some of the young actors in the show because there's a lot of
Yeah.
young kids because it takes place in high school and there's a lot of stuff like that going on. So and she had seen me work with she'd come to my acting class in Los Angeles and had seen me work with some of my actors and she came as a guest. So when I was offered that job, the conversation eventually came up about Clayton Cook and
Mm-hmm.
whether or not I'd be a good fit for the role. So I had a lot of information on the show because of that, and
That's
yeah, so it helped. It helped, and
It all
and
worked out. It all
oh,
worked
it did.
out.
It
Now,
did.
First Kill is based on a short story. Did you familiarize yourself with the short story either before or after you booked the role?
It's a really good question. I did not. But I appreciate you saying that. I knew that Victoria had written it, but what's funny is like I had met her and discussed it. I discussed actually the show because she was there from the beginning when we were filming. So, and I was already there as well. Um, and I had really familiarized myself more so with the Bible of the show and what they were planning on doing for the season. Because the short story is like a slice of it, but there was so
Yeah.
much more to explore because it's a series. So my big concern was really knowing what everything and the history of the vampires, understanding what the rules were for this universe, and exploring that was much more important to me than anything else.
Now, when you take a short story and you make a series or even a movie, but a series in particular, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be filled in by the writers to actually make it a series.
Right.
Um, what do you think of the writing so far? What do you think of the writing as you were getting the scripts on how they were expanding the story?
Well, it's always surprising. I mean, to see what a writer does when they build the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Felicia's really interesting. She doesn't like to give actors more material than what is coming their way, unless it is pertaining to like their history. So she wants actors to be surprised as they get the scripts. Um, but as you get them, you start seeing how other characters are being added, how the families are being kind of expanded, and that's kind of uh, tells you a lot about individuals is how they respond to other people. So
Oh yeah.
I take information by watching an individual and hearing how they kind of like how they react to different characters, and that helps me shape an entire character for myself. But for a show like this, there was a lot of territory to cover, and also you have to like leave it open ended as well at the end because you want it to go on for 12 to
Another
15.
season.
Yeah.
Now, for people who are thinking about checking this show out, and they're like, great, another vampire show. In your words, describe First Kill. Describe what's different from from what differs it from other vampire shows, and what makes it so appealing, and its audience keeps growing as each passing day.
Well, I think like obviously vampire shows will always be around as they've always have been around,
Mm-hmm.
so that's not going to change at all. The Romeo and Juliet story in this story, or more of a Juliet and Juliet story, is really the twist, right? Because
Yeah.
it's really two girls, a girl who's a vampire, and she falls in love with a monster hunter who's moved to town. Obviously, there's a lot of mixed ethnicities in this show to make sure that there's everyone is covered.
Mm-hmm.
And I think obviously the big change for this is the LGBTQ plus kind of like angle that they've really focused on and be authentic on. So I think that's really kind of really what I'd say from the fans that I've heard from is
Mm-hmm.
the thing that's really rung true and kind of like struck a chord with a group of people.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with that interpretation of it. Now, you have quite a few scenes when we first meet you with Imani, who
Yeah.
who plays part of the vampire killing family, and it is sort of like a Romeo Juliet. Working with these young actors, you said you were brought on as a coach. How do you deal working with new actors, and then do you take on the role? Do you take on the responsibility on your own of sort of a mentor?
Uh, yes. I mean, in some ways, I mean, everybody is different. Some of the actors really want to dive into material. Other actors want to do it on their own. Um, my job isn't to tell them that they have to work with me or they don't. And honestly, as the acting coach, I'm not the director of the show. So it's like, I don't have final say. My biggest thing is have actors come to me and they go, "What do you think about the scene? Or do you think what this history is?" A lot of the time I would go to Felicia and help her get some information instead of them having to go to her, gather information to bring to the actors. And more than anything else, when actors have questions and are like, I'm curious about the scene, I'm not sure how to approach it, just walk them through really a bunch of questions to
Mm-hmm.
ask themselves about developing the role, because it's not my role to play.
Yeah.
So I sit there and I ask people, well, where do you think you came from, or what's your opinion on this, or how do you think you'd be aggressive or passive in this situation, which road would you take? And by asking those questions, I just help actors kind of make their own choices instead of me making them.
That sounds pretty good. Now, when you got Clayton, when you got the role, how did you make him your own? Do you have any style when it comes to any role? Let's talk about Clayton in particular. How do you make a role your own?
It's interesting. In some ways, the role was originally seemed a little more militant, and it seemed that way. And I am not a militant kind of guy. Um, so when I took a look at it, my first approach was he's part of this guild, but he also is more of like a Delta Force kind of guy. He's
Yeah.
much more rebellious and doesn't take crap from anybody. So when I approach somebody like that, and he does have a lot of wisecracking moments, and he gets in people's faces, he's a hothead, and I start building a history for a character. And for me, even though there wasn't a huge history on the page for Clayton, I started approaching it from the idea of like, well, what brought him to the guild? What kind of like response is he having, and why is he here? Uh, we knew that the guild approaches people who have had issues in the past or deaths in their family due to monsters. So I created a backstory about why they would have approached me. Because of his attitude, I
Mm-hmm.
also kind of like started thinking about why would he still be frustrated and angry,
Yeah.
and where does that come from? And being the age that I am, as we discussed already, why he'd be towards the end of his career of being in the field of being a vampire hunter, and how's he feel about being probably put out to pasture soon? And those are the kind of angles that I approach. And by taking those elements and feeling there's a clock ticking for how much time I have in the field, my emotional context about where I haven't actually gotten to yet and haven't had find solutions for whatever pain and suffering I'm having, and also the context of why I'm here now. That's really where I start with a character like this.
Would you say Clayton sort of wears his emotions on his, outer skin, or is he a multi-layered character?
I think he isn't really good at controlling his emotions,
Yeah.
and I would have to say like that's part of his Achilles heel, and that's what I approach. I always approach something trying to find what somebody's weakness as well, and definitely part of his Achilles heel is the fact that he is not really great at controlling his emotions.
That's That's apparent. That's very apparent from when we first meet him on the show. Now, he's sort of like an antagonist, like we talked about within the vampire killing group.
Mhm.
What do you think is his driving force? You talked about him coming towards the end, being put out to pasture. Do you think that's all it is, or do you think there's something more driving him to be a little bit more antagonistic?
Well, if we're going to talk about like the history that I created that wasn't on the
Yeah.
page, uh, I created a backstory where his wife, when they were much younger, 20 years ago, had been killed by monsters. He'd been approached by the guild, and he wanted revenge. And for 20 years, he's been looking for revenge through these many killings that he's had as a vampire hunter, and a monster hunter. And even though he's had a bunch of kills, he has not found peace in his soul. And feeling like he's at the end where they've kind of let him know that there's only so much longer he's going to be in the field, either as a hunter or as somebody who's an advisor. He's probably going to be chained to a desk and still hasn't found any sort of peace in himself. That's a lot where the anger comes from, realizing that he can't find it by killing more monsters.
How critical, and I've asked this question to a lot of different actors, and a backstory is very important to almost every actor I've spoken to. When it comes to your craft, how important is the backstory for you?
It's everything. No one's world starts when they walk onto the screen when you see them for the first time.
Yeah.
They've had an entire life. In Clayton's case, he's had 50 years of life behind him already, and I have to decide what that childhood's like, what caused him to go down this path, and what led him to this day. Every day that I'm on set, so without those decisions being made, you have a very flat and two-dimensional character. You
Mm-hmm.
have to like work and really think about all of the layers, or you're going to be dealing with a two-dimensional thing instead of a three-dimensional thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, playing role, you've been lucky throughout your career where you haven't sort of been pigeonholed into playing a particular type of character. You've gotten to play a pretty wide spectrum of characters throughout your career. When you're booked, when you're cast to play a bad guy, do you feel like that gives you a little bit more artistic freedom to sort of play around with the role as opposed to the hero, in the story who has to sort of walk that line and not really deviate?
That's a really good question too. Here's the thing: is I feel like when I play heroes, they need to be detailed, but it's also just as important to figure out Indiana Jones needs to be scared of snakes, or you have a problem.
Yeah.
Uh, Dorothy has to hate Kansas, or you have a problem. You don't have a story. So even as the hero, you have to figure out what is the journey that you're going to have. It does tend to be more traditional as a hero in a lot of senses. Or if I am somebody who is helping the hero go along, if I'm playing the cowardly lion in the script or somewhere, I have to realize what that means for me too. But when I play villains, the beauty of playing villains, and part of the reason why I love playing them so much, is that you are able to dive into the psyche of somebody who is not a good person,
Yeah.
and you're able to really figure out something. Especially if I get the whole script and I'm able to see what the hero is, I can figure out how I can. I try to build a mountain for the hero that I'm fighting if I'm playing a villain. The same way that Drago for Rocky was that villain.
Yes.
And you have to build the bigger the mountain that you build that the hero has to climb, the better villain you are. Nobody wants to watch somebody climb an anthill. They want to watch them climb a mountain. And that's what you have to create. And that's why it gets so exciting, is to create a path that that's difficult for them to like ascend to.
That's beautifully described. Now, the show takes place in Savannah, Georgia. Georgia's a big filming hotspot. Do you guys actually shoot in Savannah as well?
We actually shot in Atlanta
Mm.
for the whole shoot, except for they did a bunch of exteriors and they did about 4 days of shooting. I think it was in Savannah total.
Now, Netflix hasn't officially green lighted a second season, but the way the show is picking up momentum, it sort of looks like it will get picked up again. Uh, are you? I mean, tell us your interest in picking up the role again of Clayton and moving him into a second season.
Well, I mean, we'll see. We'll see if that's possible or not. But more than anything else, I hope for success for all the people on the show and for Felicia, and I hope that there's a second season, just so they get to continue doing what they're doing, and the fans get to continue that I've seen to enjoying the show. And I just think that's really what we're dealing with here. Is kind of like I hope that everyone gets to keep enjoying it, because I think it's just going to get better if it gets to go another season.
You think there's a lot more to learn about Clayton if it does go into a second season?
I don't know if that's possible.
You never know. It could be a real
Never know.
surprise. So,
Anything's possible. Once there's a witch on the show, anything's possible. So, they brought a witch in about episode 6 or 7. When that happens, you never know what the result's going to be for another season. You have no idea.
in the time that we have left, let's just talk a little bit about your career. Like I said, you've had a marvelous career, an extensive resume going back into the early 90s. You've appeared
Back
in.
to the 1850s, I think. If you take a look, I performed up in the Borscht Belt for a while up there, in the vaudeville days. No, yeah.
You've been in some like classic movies, television shows like Married with Children. If when you look back in your career, what would you say was your biggest break?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, if you're talking about everyone remembers their first break. So
Yeah,
like Married with Children, I had Christina Applegate's picture on my wall in college. So it was one of those things where, you know,
and you got to
I
play her
told my
boyfriend.
yeah, and I told my friends I could play her boyfriend. That's what I would say in college when we watched the show. So the fact having fantasy become reality was a really mind-boggling thing.
I
That
can
was huge.
imagine.
Yeah, that was massive. And my first film that I ever did was Clueless, which also
Hmm.
a dream come true. And Amy saw me in a showcase. Amy Heckerling, the director, saw me in a showcase in Los Angeles, and was kind enough to bring me onto that film, which was amazing. Those two moments for me were massive. But there's a few other ones, and I can list a couple. The Perfect Storm to me was a chance to go back to Massachusetts where I grew up, and that was like a dream come true. And my first big film that I really was like blown away that I had an opportunity to do. Townies was a sitcom,
Yeah,
and all I ever wanted to be was on a sitcom my entire life when I was a kid. And then all of a sudden I had a dressing room. I mean,
yeah.
they're weird. There were milestones, and they're not done yet. I might still have milestones that I want to
Oh yeah.
cross. But the fact that almost every job, not every job, but many jobs let me kind of explore a new thing. When I did Happy, it was a chance to really kind of like dive into a Santa Claus character that they gave me free reign to kind of do whatever I wanted to do. And that was the first time I was ever just given that much time to develop a character. And that was a blessing. So, there's so many things I could say that kind of like really make me happy to do this every time. And every job is another journey that I get to go on. So it's great.
As your career progresses, you mentioned coaching actors. Is your interest to stay in front of the camera? Do you have other interests, maybe going behind the camera, some writing, directing, producing, or are you perfectly content to stay in front of the camera for as long as you can?
I'm hoping to be able to nap a lot this year, but other than that, uh, the thing is, I do write. I have a script that I really want to direct this year. Now that you mentioned that, yes, there's a feature that I've been working on. I have a writing group that I go with every week too, and work with a bunch of wonderful writers, and I'm hoping to direct that film. I think most people who know me think that I really do enjoy teaching more than anything that I do. It makes me the happiest. Uh, it is something that brings me joy every day when I get to do it. But I just directed something in New York, and I'm just hoping to continue doing a little bit of everything because at the end of the day, the beauty of this job is no two jobs are exactly the same.
Yeah,
So
and we could tell just by listening to you talk, you love the craft, you love the business, and you put everything on the table 100%. Whatever job it is, you put everything on the line, and I think that's what makes you so great. I want to
that's
thank you so much for coming on here and sharing with us some of your experiences. Again, guys, the show is called First Kill. It is available now on Netflix. Joseph Reitman here plays a vampire killer, and not just your ordinary vampire killer, a vampire killer with a little chip on his shoulder. So check it out. You won't be disappointed. It's a great show. You have any final thoughts you want to share, Joe, before we go?
I'm just grateful that you were willing to spend some time with me and talk to me about something that I love. So thank
Oh,
you so much.
absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our audience who tuned in live and those of you who'll be watching later on. On behalf of Joseph Reitman and myself, stay safe and stay walking. Good night, everybody.